With a lagging economy and huge disagreement among its citizens on social issues, the United States feels more divided than ever. Those divisions will be put on display as voters head to the polls this month for the crucial midterm elections.
With both houses of Congress up for grabs, the vote is essentially a referendum on Joe Biden's presidency and will determine how much power he has for the rest of his term.
Now, it all sounds potentially a bit complicated, so we turn to the senior fellow at the United States Studies Centre, Bruce Wolpe, to help break down the big issues for us. Bruce, thank you for joining Flash Drive.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
So you're an expert in all of this stuff. I wonder if we could start, though, at the very beginning. And for people who maybe aren't across the midterms, if you could just explain really basically, what are they?
What are the midterms?
What are the midterms?
They're called the midterms because they're in the middle of a presidential term. Okay, we had an election 2 years ago, 2020, the president's elected. And the term of the House of Representatives is 2 years. So every 2 years is an election for the House. And then because the Senate terms are 6 years and it's staggered, it's 1/3 of the Senate is up. Now, Australia patterned its constitution in part on the United States. So Australia has 3-year terms for the House and then a half Senate election at every federal Commonwealth election.
Yep.
So it's sort of not dissimilar from what Australia is. So it is really a vote for control of Congress because all the House and 1/3 of the Senate are up. And this year, with Joe Biden struggling, it really is a question of, it's a referendum on him. And is this a vote of confidence in him? And if so, can he keep his control of Congress? Or do the Republicans capture the House and or the Senate and really put an end as far as major legislation of the Biden agenda in place? So the political consequences are quite significant.
Indeed. And tell us, what is the state of play currently in the House and Senate?
Currently, it's very narrowly divided, as tight as I've seen in my lifetime, actually. The House margin that Biden holds it by, the Democrats have it, are 5 seats out of 435.
Mm-hmm.
In the Senate, it's 50-50. And the Democrats have control because under a 50-50 Senate, the vice president, Kamala Harris, has cast the deciding vote. And where Democrats have won their legislative victories, it is a 50-50 vote and the vice president votes in favor. Mm-hmm. Sometimes she makes a mistake. No, she doesn't do that. But that's how narrow it is.
Mm.
Now, historically, in the first midterm of a presidency, the average loss of House seats by the president's party is 25. With a margin of 5, history almost guarantees that the House will go Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And as I look at the races and where they're positioned and so forth, I think the House will absolutely go Republican.
Right. So you think that's inevitable?
I believe it's inevitable. So keep this videotape and we'll run it on November 9th and we'll see how it goes. Okay.
We'll do that. Okay. So therefore the Senate becomes really crucial.
It does. But the question is why, aside from the historical average, why right now with this president and so forth? And what the obvious thing that a president has control is seen as being responsible for is the economy.
Mm-hmm.
How is the economy going? And there are a lot of other issues. There are issues of abortion. There are issues of Donald Trump. There are issues of extremism in the Republican Party. There's issues of voting rights. There's issues of gun control. But when people really come down to it, in this environment where the economy is not going so well, I mean, in one way it is. If you want a job, you can get a job. You can get a relatively high-paying job. I've been in the United States a couple times over the year. And when I went in February, we're hiring $15 an hour. In August, we're hiring $20 an hour. And so it's really going up.
Mm.
But what's also going up is inflation. And it's really hot right now and at record 40-year levels as we speak. That's bad news. My cookie story. So I go into the supermarket and I buy a bag of gourmet cookies, okay? $10. 1 week later, I eat some cookies. 1 week later, $11.50.
Mm.
And so imagine you're filling up at the tank, you're going to the store daily, weekly, and everything is going up. And that really hurts. And Republicans are very adept at exploiting that issue. So are you more economically secure or less? Plus, you're a senior, you're on Social Security, the equivalent of the pension here. Inflation is eating away your savings. You have a super account. Well, the IRAs in America, the stock market's down 25%. So you're hurting. So notwithstanding Biden's good intentions, he has delivered some things and is working hard. People hold the president responsible, and that's why the House is going to shift so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Tell us what this map tells us right now.
As I said, about a third of the Senate is up, a 50-50 Senate. So the Republicans, to gain control, have to have a net gain of 1 seat. The Republicans have to hold all their existing seats, and they'd like to take 1 or 2 away. So there are several Democrats who have been threatened, and those races, and the ones for our viewers and audience listeners to watch carefully, where are Democrats running really tight races? Where are they vulnerable? A big race is in Georgia, and and a lot of people have paid attention to it because it's sort of steamy. You have Raphael Warnock, a black senator elected 2 years ago, versus Herschel Walker, a football star that Donald Trump has endorsed. Herschel Walker has a kind of messy personal life, and Fox Sports should be covering him, every day.
Yep.
and it's hurt him in a state where they actually thought they'd get a pickup.
Right? What happened with Herschel Walker? What's that main scandal?
He hasn't been straight on his family history.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, he has several children that he hasn't publicly acknowledged before. An ex-wife of his has gone public and said he held a gun to my head and threatened my life. And there's at least one woman and maybe 2 whom he asked to have an abortion for children resulting from pregnancy, and he is strongly anti-abortion. So a question of contradiction on hypocrisy on issues and something messy and so forth. But we're in an age when we can go back to the Clinton impeachment where bad things happen, but he remains as president.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump is campaigning. He says he wants to grab something. He's president.
Yep.
Herschel Walker has a messy personal life. He might be a senator. So these issues don't stick as much. And also kind of, you're in the news business. The news culture is sort of like denialism all the time, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you're accusing me of that? It's not true. Go away. It's fake news,
Right.
I'm telling the truth. And so that cultural issue is kind of cutting as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom line is, one thing though, in historic terms, I grew up in the civil rights movement. 2 black men are running for the Senate in Georgia. I mean, that's really, in one sense, you say, where's America going? Well, that's kind of really something.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. The other current senator is a Jewish guy.
Yeah.
I mean, so there you go. Who knew?
That's great.
That's right.
So Georgia's an interesting race. What else?
Arizona. Mark Kelly is the senator. He's the astronaut. His brother's an astronaut. He's the husband of Gabby Giffords, a congresswoman who was shot at her office a decade ago and really brought the issue of gun violence forward. Arizona is now a swing state, but it's the home of Barry Goldwater, the patron saint of conservatives in the Republican Party, and even though Biden carried it, it could be swinging back. But a Trump extremist is running, and Mark Kelly's done a really good job. He should hold that seat. Another seat to really watch is Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
That's an open Republican seat. The Republican is retiring. So the Democrats would love to get that seat. And contesting it is the lieutenant governor, a fellow named John Fetterman. He's the one who had a stroke a couple months ago. And people are saying, are you really up to the task here? And he's running against a TV celebrity doctor, Mehmet Oz, that Trump endorsed. And Trump loves celebrity doctors and people on TV. The woman in Arizona who's running for governor was a news anchor for 22 years.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump chose her, and she probably is going to win the governorship.
Okay.
So can the Republicans hold Pennsylvania with Dr. Oz? Unfortunately, he's not Australian. or is it going to go Democratic? So that's something really to watch. There are a couple other Democratic races. There are a couple other races that are really interesting that in Florida, Marco Rubio, well-known Republican senator, he's being challenged by a black woman, Val Demings, and it just may be that his time is up. That'll be in North Carolina. People are also looking at the incumbent senator is running not as strong as he should. Maybe there's an upset there. In Iowa, Chuck Grassley, 88 years old, running for a 6th term in the Senate. God only knows why, but he suddenly looks a little old and vulnerable too. So that could be a real upset. But if people are voting the economy, I think those waves for Democrats are much more challenging.
Right. And I've seen some polls that suggest in the Senate that maybe, some will change hands and then it might just end up looking about the same in terms of the finished numbers.
Most people think it'll be 1 seat either way. So, and we will just, My gut tells me that because the Trump candidates are more extreme than the mainstream, that I think some people, and particularly, okay, the economy's bad. More women in America, more women vote in America than men. Women are, generally speaking, 70% plus, are deeply troubled by abortion. So, and the Supreme Court taking away abortion rights. So they may well say, okay, I'm going to send an economic message with my House vote, but I don't want abortion rights taken. I want to protest that. And I don't want this person who's running for the Senate in Arizona who's saying, I'm going to outlaw abortions across the United States. I don't want them in there. So I think that's why the vote might be more moderate in the Senate elections. And that's why I think if you tortured me today in North Korea and said, okay, who's going to win? I'd say, okay, I think the Democrats are going to hold the Senate.
Interesting. Okay, we'll be watching
and keep
that.
the videotape on
we,
that
we
too.
will.
All right?
We will. We're filming. Let's dig in a bit more into Joe Biden and his performance.
Yes.
So you brought another interesting graph for us that shows his popularity ratings, or his approval ratings, I should say. Again, we'll bring this up on the screen. Tell us what this graph says.
This is an aggregate. There's 538 policy, which is a famous website of political polls and wisdom. And what it is aggregate polling of Biden's approval rating from the beginning of his presidency until today. And he started out really well. He was in the mid 50s. He came into office saying, I'm not Trump. Trump is gone. Most people are happy. I'm going to solve the economy. I'm going to solve COVID. Big economic package passes, money in people's pockets, just like here in Australia. People feel pretty good. COVID, I'm going to manage the program responsibly. We're going to get you vaccines. We're going to have sensible health rules and so forth. It takes off and it starts working, and people start feeling normal. But 5 months later, it's not normal. There are new variants. People aren't getting back to normal that way. And because the economy had been, no one kind of expected because we hadn't been through it. When the economy, quote, recovered as the pandemic was easing, it caused all sorts of dislocations, particularly supply chains. Mm-hmm. So it was very, very choppy. And high wages had not come back yet either. And it was just kind of discombobulating. And so he was beginning to lose some support in the middle of the year. But then Afghanistan happened.
Right.
And that was serious because look, everyone remembers the images of people on airplanes dropping from those planes to their deaths in the hectic evacuation from Afghanistan. And what happened there was, here's the guy who had so much foreign policy experience. He had the A-team, Blinken, Jake Sullivan, who really knew what they were doing. Well, how could they get it so wrong? Mm. And I mean, before the evacuation from Afghanistan, Biden was asked, well, is it going to be like Saigon, the fall of Vietnam, and helicopters on the rooftop of the embassy? He said no. And the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor would say, well, we understand that we believe that the Afghan government will stay in power for months after we leave. Well, in the course of 4 days, it collapsed. Mm-hmm. So even though foreign policy is generally not a big issue in a president's standing, this hurt.
And so that's where you see
a cross between approve to disapprove. Mm-hmm. And things really did. So on the economic front, things did not really get better as the year progressed and going into the summer of 2022. And in the summer of 2022, inflation started really roaring back. Gasoline prices went up, and that really hurt, even though there were plenty of jobs and plenty of good paying jobs. And that improved Biden's standing, but not enough. But the point of the graph where it is right now, his aggregate approval is in the low to mid 40s. Disapproval is 52. A president going into a midterm election with an approval rating under 50% is in big trouble. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't have the lift to carry it. He doesn't give headwinds. He's not at the back of helping lift other Democratic candidates. And that's an added factor as to why I'm very pessimistic on the House.
Okay. What are some of the other issues that you think might affect voter turnout?
They are affecting voter turnout. I mentioned women and abortion, and that's going to be very important. Climate change. There was a big climate clean energy bill passed a couple months ago. Young people were saying, well, what are you doing on climate change? Well, now they have something. Also, a lot of student loan debt was forgiven, and it's another reason for young people to vote. I think the black vote is really interesting because the key issue with that community has been voting rights. And there hasn't been an advance on voting rights because he can't get it through the Senate.
Mm.
And so they're frustrated. So they're saying, well, where are voting rights for us? Another key constituency that's really important are Hispanic Americans. And they're very a varied group. Where are they from? Are they from Latin America? Are they from Cuba? So it's a varied community. But there's generally small business people. And so they think in those terms and want a good commercial environment, but they also have slightly more conservative social cultural values. And so an issue like abortion really does not cut. They're more split on that than the rest of the country.
Okay.
So are the Hispanic voters going to turn out for? They will vote Democratic, but by enough of a margin.
Mm.
So the other issues really are, I think, abortion first and foremost. Extremism in the Republican Party and threats to democracy and all the things that we've seen in the January 6th committee hearings on what happened that day and the conspiracy that the committee has outlined that they believe Trump orchestrated to overturn the 2020 election.
Mm-hmm.
So I think among traditional Democrats, Biden will win big, but it's always the swing voters. So what's the best equivalent? The teals here.
Mm-hmm.
That's how a lot of women may vote in America. The same issues, their personal health and welfare, corruption, and environment.
Mm-hmm.
So
An interesting comparison.
it's an
there.
interesting comparison.
So it seems like that the economy will be the main issue that'll hurt the Democrats, but then all of these subsidiary reasons might help them. The subsidiary issues.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Let's talk about the Trump factor.
Oh, good.
Yes. Let's get into it.
God, we've been into this for a long time and we haven't talked
Hasn't
about
come
Trump.
up. He will be furious if he listens to this.
He will. Let's send this to him. What do you think?
We should.
Okay.
Look, let's start with the January 6 issue. So to me, as an Australian voter, it seems crazy that the idea that the last election was stolen still has so much purchase in America. How does that happen?
He has a real following. People believe in him, and they believe several things. First, that he's a very successful businessman. No one owns him, so he can really do what his conscience, what he wants to deliver, and be true to his conscience. Second, he likes to kick over the tables in Washington and make people upset, and so we can break the ice and get things done. Third, for a guy who's lied 30,000 times during his presidency, I think I've been criticized for saying this. I think he's the most relentlessly honest politician we've seen in a long time. He says, "I'm going to tear up the Iran deal. I'm going to tear up the Paris Accord on climate. I'm going to get out of the World Health Organization. I don't like NATO. I don't want troops overseas. I'm going to withdraw from Afghanistan." And when you add it up, and I want to build the wall. He didn't get all the wall, but he didn't resile from his intent.
I'm going to improve the economy.
I'm going to improve the economy. People look back. If he comes back into the campaign, they'll say, "Remember my economy? Look what you have now. What do you think?"
Mm.
And so for all those reasons, I think he has a really solid base, and they believe in him. But what the January 6th committee has done, and all the exposure from it, is again raised real questions about the future of America's democracy, and that concerns most people. But again, who's highly motivated to vote?
Mm.
His people really are.
And do you think it's a lot of the criticism about the January 6th committee and its findings have been the makeup of the committee itself, right? It's largely Democrats and a few Republicans, but what Trump might call rhinos or never Trumpers, right?
Well, this is real inside baseball, or inner cricket, I call it. Okay. And the inner cricket on this was, I worked in that building for 10 years, and that building is like it's a temple of democracy. It was inconceivable to me that Americans would attack that building and take over the chambers and try and stop the business of the Congress of the United States from being conducted.
Mm.
But it happened, and it is shocking. And it is one of the most significant events in American history, and it should never be repeated. Okay, so there was going to be an accounting for what happened and why. And when Speaker Nancy Pelosi started, she says, "I want to do this committee, and I want it bipartisan, and let's do it." After 9/11, it was a bipartisan commission to find out what happened on 9/11, who was responsible, what we need to do. That's where she started. But because Trump said, this is a witch hunt, and they're going to come after me, we're not cooperating. And the Republican leaders in the House said, we're not cooperating. Well, guess what? It's an own goal. They took themselves off the field. And so the field is left with Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, two Republicans whom Trump hates, and they hate Trump and so forth. They're the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
So all that has unfolded is because the Republicans decided not to play. And they're losing because they decided not to play. You don't show up for a game, you forfeit.
Yeah, true.
All right.
Yeah. And so Trump's not on the ballot at the midterms. Like, that's important for people to understand. But he does have an influence in many races, right?
He does. And actually, he is on the ballot in that way. And it really, if we want to jump ahead to 2024 for a moment.
Please.
Okay. If this, as we've been discussing, the Senate is just so important. Let's talk about the consequences of what happens. The Republicans take the House, but not the Senate. They can do things in the House, but they can't pass their agenda in the Senate if the Democrats can. It's not going to go anywhere. So they can make a lot of noise. Some of that noise is going to be pretty January 6th committee-ish. I think the Republicans in the House are going to impeach Joe Biden next year.
I think they will.
And there are a couple. They want to go after the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and they want to go after the person who's the Secretary of Homeland Security, who's running immigration and the open border. That's another big issue. Too many people are scared of what's happening on the southern border, and immigration seems out of control.
Right.
Okay. But they do this stuff, and nothing can get done. They can't get anything done in the Senate. If the Republicans control the Senate as well as the House, Joe Biden can veto anything that they want and have that veto stick. But they will have a record of showing America what they could do if they were capture the White House in 2024. Now, I really think what the Senate elections tell us about 2024 is this. You have these Trump candidates, as you said, running in several states. If they can win, that means that Trump's judgment of the politics and the people that he wants aligned with him, they can win. And his message to the Republican Party is, you want to be victorious again? You stick with me. Okay. Let's say the Democrats hold. And in Georgia and in Arizona and in Pennsylvania and in Florida and in Iowa, they defeat Trump candidates. Well, if you're a Republican who wants to take the White House in 2024, you say to yourself, well, let me think about this. And you have this, 200, 300-pound gorilla, sitting right outside your door. Let me think about this. You became president. You lost the House of Representatives to Democrats in 2018. And by the way, you were impeached twice because they controlled the House. You lost the White House in 2020, even though you say you didn't, but you did. And you lost the Senate in 2021. There was a special election in Georgia, 2 senators that gave the Democrats 50 seats. So you lost the House, the White House, the Senate, and then you didn't get the Senate back in 2022. Your candidates cost us the Senate. Why should we go with you in 2024? So I actually think the outcome from the Senate will have a big factor on what happens to the Republican presidential race in 2024.
Do you think it's inevitable that Trump will run?
I do, because I think he can't resist it.
But what if he loses?
Well, he'll say I didn't lose.
He'll say, yeah, well, that worked last time.
My fantasy, I'm sorry, for everyone listening, I'm a Democrat. I work for the Democrats. Factor that into everything I'm saying, please. Okay.
Noted.
Price it in, all right? Yes. So my fantasy race on this is a likely other Republican entrant is Ron DeSantis, the conservative governor of Florida. He's very attractive because he's everything that Trump says he is, but without the baggage and the psychological stuff. And so he's sort of a really attractive, safe Trumpist. And he's very popular in Florida. He's up for election in November. He did a good job on the hurricane 2 weeks ago. I think he's going to win. Okay. So
exploiting that migration issue quite effectively as well.
Well, you want a guy who's really, I won't say it on this broadcast, but he takes immigrants from Texas and he flies them up to Martha's Vineyard in liberal Massachusetts. And he says, we have an immigration problem on the border and we want to share our problem with you. And he did that.
Yeah.
He did that. And so he's kind of, he's out there. Okay. So let's say there's a Republican primary in Florida for the presidential nomination, Trump versus DeSantis. DeSantis wins. Trump said, you stole the election from me. And so even when Trump doesn't win, he wins.
Right. Okay. Very interesting.
I want to go back to one other thing that you said.
Yep.
How could this couldn't happen here, this election denial stuff, right? And it can't happen here because the Australian Election Commission.
A
And
godsend.
It is. But just think about it for a moment. Let's say that the seat of Gilmore in New South Wales in the federal election here, Commonwealth election, federal election here, was very close, 300 votes. Let's say Andrew Constance lost the seat. Let's say that Gilmore was going to decide who formed government. Can you imagine what would happen if Prime Minister Morrison called up the head of the Australian Electoral Commission and he says, "You know I won, Gilmore. My rallies were much bigger than their rallies. And it's just 300 votes. All I need is 300 votes. Can you please find me 300 votes and we win the election and take government?" And that's what Trump did in the phone call to the Secretary of State of Georgia. Now, if the Prime Minister did that here, he'd be in jail. Well, there's a grand jury in Georgia looking at what Trump did.
Well, I mean, let's dig into that, because from an Australian perspective,
It's nuts.
so many of these things that go on, they literally can't happen in Australia because, as you say, our Australian Electoral Commission is independent. They draw up the electoral boundaries free from any government interference.
Yes,
That's not how things work in America, is it?
it's not. And the other, that's why they do just an outstanding job. It's completely depoliticized. But it is, just as you say, all the election rules are run by the states. The redrawing of districts, the redistribution here is done by the states. Who can vote is decided by the states. How the votes are counted is decided by the states. Who certifies the vote is decided by the states. And so
So whoever's in power can redraw boundaries to their benefit.
and they do. It's called gerrymandering, and it happens all the time. And Trump has a couple hundred people running in local races in the big swing states, the really key swing states: Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, who, if they win, could have their hands on the electoral mechanism and try and change the law and change the rules so that the counting of the vote will be more favorable to Trump.
And you said as well that they can decide who can vote. In Australia, if you're 18, you can vote.
You can vote, but they can just, and they say, yes, if you're 18, you can vote in Georgia. But guess what's going to, we're limiting the number of drop boxes around the state. And we're not going to have many in the city of Atlanta, but we'll have them out in the countryside. And you can, and we'll limit the number of days in which you can vote early, pre-poll, before voting day. And if you if you find yourself in line, you can't have food or water while you're waiting in line to vote.
Why?
Here we have democracy sausages,
Yeah,
and we
right.
get out.
That's the reason to go.
It is. I had 2 on the last election. It was great. So
Right.
it
That's
is
scary.
Yes, but the other thing that really is the hugest insulating factor is mandatory voting, compulsory voting. In America, all voting is voluntary. So if you're highly motivated, you vote. If you are really strong anti-abortion and you have an anti-abortion candidate in your state or for the House, you're going to vote for them, and you're out there. But in the real world, well, let's take abortion. So 70% of the American people do not want heavy restrictions on abortion. But the Supreme Court has said that right doesn't exist anymore. And if everyone has to vote, the anti-abortion forces will not win. If everyone has to vote, those who want gun control will win. If everyone can vote, those who want reasonable voting rules will win. So it is a fundamental flaw in the American system as far as expressing the will of having government execute the will of the people, because the will of the people is frustrated by special interests.
And also from an Australian perspective, to me, it feels like America is becoming more divided. I don't know if this is true though, but like from my perspective, it seems like oftentimes Democrats and Republicans are almost living on different planets.
They are.
And in Australia, like we just had an election and government changed hands. And all of Australia just kind of shrugs and gets on with their lives. What is what I'm saying fair?
It is, and there are a couple aspects to it. First, the United States is heavily divided. It's more divided than at any time that I've seen, and there's no bridging between the Democrats. It happens. There is good work together on foreign policy. American policy to Australia extremely positive, shared by Republicans and Democrats. Problems with China, extremely, those issues are shared, Republicans and Democrats. It's really on the domestic policy issues that you have these big differences. And in the old days, 60s and 70s and so forth, the parties worked together regularly. That's why Joe Biden, who became a senator in the 1970s, says, I really want to work with Republicans, but there are no Republicans to work with anymore. And so that is a real problem for him. But the partisanship, I just don't see any way to end it. What Washington has become is really sort of like Canberra. It's Westminster politics. In other words, everyone is in their party. The parties vote uniformly, and if you control the House of Representatives with your party, you can execute your program. You have to get votes in the Senate, but it generally follows. That's what Washington is becoming. But because you have a president of one party and a Congress of other parties, it isn't the same. Here, all the government is in the Parliament, and it is unified, a unitary government. So a Westminster culture has infected the American constitutional system.
So they're always at each other's
They're always
throats.
at each other's throats. Now, the founders kind of liked it that way, but I think they would not be happy with what they're seeing.
Very interesting. All right. Well, look, this has been a fascinating discussion. I wonder, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would tell our audience to look out for as the race nears?
I think the key thing, again, is the Senate, and because it will be a signal for 2024. But I, too, am very, very concerned about the future of American democracy and where it goes from here. And I think most people are hungry for real leadership that can bring the country together. And I don't know whether they're seeing it right now. I don't expect things to get better in the short term. This could be a very trying time. I'm sorry to end on a low note.
Yeah, that's a worrying place to end it, but this is where we are.
This is where we are. This is where we are.
Bruce, thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating to chat.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, that was all really interesting to hear. What were some of the bits that stood out for you, James?
So I think from an Australian perspective, like, we have mostly seen a lot of the controversy around the Roe v. Wade decision. So this is the decision to take away abortion rights from women across the country. And what Bruce was saying is that's an important issue, but potentially not as important as some other issues, namely the economy. So if the economy is not going well, that's really going to hurt the Democrats because they're in power. So if they can't sort of turn that narrative around, then they're potentially in deep trouble. Where I would have thought, do you think I would have thought that abortion issue is just going to turn out so many more women voters and would be the sort of thing that decides the election, but maybe not.
Yeah, you'd think so. But a lot of these votes recently, I feel like elections almost always come down to economic issues because it's something that affects every single person in the country. Whereas I guess the abortion issue, a lot of people might think, yeah, that's sad, that's unfair, but doesn't really affect me. So yeah, it could be the sticking point for old Joe.
Could be. And the other thing that stood out is he was talking about Trump. So Trump, he's no longer president, but he still has a lot of influence over the Republican Party. He's kind of handpicked a lot of candidates in some crucial seats. And what Bruce was saying is that if Trump's picks do not perform well in the midterms, you've got a question about whether Trump is the right person for the next presidential nominee, because he lost the White House, he lost the Congress, and if he lost some of the runoff elections as well, and so if he doesn't kind of turn that around, then maybe they'll look to someone else for the next president. So it could be not only consequential for Joe, also for Don.
Yeah. Well, that's the logical argument when it comes to Donald Trump, but he's the guy that logic doesn't seem to apply to. So
That's true.
We'll have to wait and see what plays out.
That's true. Liz, let me also do an egregious plug for Flash.
Please.
So I think that the midterm elections, for people who are interested in this, is a really good reason to get Flash, because what you'll be able to do when the results come in on Wednesday is watch all of the different channels at once. So you can, they don't often call all of the races at the same time. So you can have up to 4 different channels playing on your screen at the same time, and then kind of mute one and then like flip over to CNN, flip over to Fox and see what they're saying, see what CNBC is saying, see what Sky News Australia is saying, kind of get a bit of a different view on the races as the results pour in. So I think that's a good reason to sign up to Flash.
Sounds very cool.
Yeah, it will be. So yes, the midterms are on Tuesday, but most of the results will sort of come through on Wednesday, Australia time. So that's the time to tune in.
Nice.
Liz, thank you so much for joining us again on Flash. Now, here's the news. We have a new presenter for Flash who will be welcoming this week. Her name is Lucy McLeod, and she'll be joining us from next week onwards on the pod. So, Liz, this is the end of your time with us for a little while, but I've got your number, so I'm sure
right.
you'll get the call up again.
Look, I'll be back, and I'm looking forward to listening to you and Lucy.
Thank you, and thanks so much for all your time over the past few months. We've really appreciated it, and it's been great to hear your insights.
It's been good fun.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.